flash on the camera, and then unlimited pictures. Some of you who are older, like me, will remember camera rolls, limited to 24, 36 pictures. You could take them, snap 36 pictures. You had to keep a bag full of camera rolls if you want to take more pictures. Then you'd have to send them to be developed, and half of them would turn out to be junk. And you trash them, and now you could take a gazillion pictures. Nobody cares. No limit. I mean, what's that worth? Entire library of world music is on this thing. I can listen to any piece of music pretty much anytime, even while flying way up in the air with Wi-Fi. I can watch movies, TV shows, classic movies from silent era. It's a map, but better than a map because it has GPS, so it tells me directions. God, do any of you remember what it was like to navigate around a new city with a map, trying to drive and look at a map at the same time? And now I complain if my car doesn't have Apple Car, where I can plug it in and the map appears on a dashboard in front of me. I can do spreadsheets. I can write. It's a typewriter. I can print from this. I mean, I'm just looking at the apps. Oh, it's a health tracker. I mean, combined with my watch, it can track all of my activity and give me an ECG, stuff you'd have to go to the doctor to do and do a stress test. Of course, it's a calculator. I remember having those big calculators. Now it's just on my phone. I can do any calculation on my phone. I can recreate an HP. Remember those HP financial calculators? You could do that on your phone. It will mimic that. You could book travel. You can get, I mean, we're rich. We truly are amazingly rich. And over the last 250 years, based on income, based on wealth, we're about 300 times on average richer than the people who lived 250 years ago. But that's way, 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 way understating how much richer we are. Because what kind of value do you put on running water? How much value do you put on electricity? An ability to just flip a switch and there's light. I mean, you pay electric bills, and that's what kind of our wealth is measured in how much we pay for the electricity. But how much is electricity worth to you? I mean, many orders of magnitude above what you actually pay for it. The entertainment, the spare time, the fact that our kids don't die before the age of 10, the fact that our life expectancy is double what it used to be, more than double what it used to be. How do you even put a measure to that? The fact that you can travel anywhere in the world, just hours, be anywhere, pre-COVID at least. And maybe post-COVID, one would hope. So we are not 300 times richer. I would argue that we are millions times richer than people who just lived 250 years ago. And 250 years is nothing in history. It's, human beings have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. 250 years, nothing. And yet look how much we have done in 250 years. How rich we have gotten. Deirdre McCluskey, who is an economist, a friend, calls this the great enrichment. The great enrichment. There's no precedent for this in human history. Not even close. Forever, the human race lived on $2 to $3 a day for hundreds, well, tens of thousands of years. Now, yes, there were periods that were better. Greece was better. Generally, life expectancy was higher than before and after. Generally, life was more comfortable. But you can't compare in terms of material comforts. You cannot compare Greece to today. And yes, Rome was a little better. Maybe in Rome they had running water, at least in some places, taps. You can see that in Pompeii. But they didn't have planes or cars or electricity. They had none of what we take completely for granted every single day. Every single day from almost the moment we're born. The difference in wealth between us and the Romans is extraordinary. And of course, things only got worse after the Romans, not better. So what happened? I think the most important question in the humanities, in the social sciences, in economics and history and political science and sociology or whatever legitimate social sciences they are, is to find the answer to how did this happen? Because this is, the last 250 years are the most momentous period in all of human history. Something clicked 250 years ago. Something came together in a way that it had never come together before in human history. And it had a profound, massive, unpredicted, completely unpredicted impact on human life. Our ancestors could not imagine progress like we have experienced over the last 200 years. They couldn't have imagined it. It would have been so out of their experience. I mean, life expectancy in 1800 was under 40. Wealth was maybe a smidgen over. It wasn't $2 in Western Europe. In the United States, maybe it was 4 or 5. Horses were everywhere. Horse manure everywhere. Sewage everywhere. You know, we romanticize 1776, but it wasn't a very comfortable time to be alive. No flushing toilets. None of the things, again, we take for granted. And violence. Steven Pinker has written about this. And we live in the most peaceful era, not only the richest era, but the most peaceful, at least if you take out government coercion, but government coercion was a lot worse in the 18th century, 17th century, 16th century. So the most important question that we face, and I think a question that, in a sense, the fate of the future depends on, is why? What happened? What is the cause of the great enrichment? Now, many people have written about this and have tried to explain this. And there are all kinds of explanations. You know, people started to accumulate capital. And capitalism is based on the idea of capital. Capital accumulation, invested, created the Industrial Revolution, which brought about the modern world. Really? You cannot explain the economics of the 19th century or the progress we've made because of capital accumulation. Capital accumulation, capital has to go somewhere. There were lots of ideas. Where did they come from? Were there ideas earlier and they just couldn't find capital? Is that the problem? No evidence to suggest that. Why did people start accumulating capital? Where did that capital come from? Something changed. Some people say that it is a product of institutions. That because of English common law and the history of particular institutions around property rights and other aspects of the legal system, this was inevitable. Property rights and institutions, particularly in Great Britain, created an environment which led to, and there's some truth there. But there have been other eras in which property rights were respected, at least to some extent, starting with Rome, but even in China to some extent during certain periods. And there's the question of why did property rights suddenly become important in the early 19th century or late 18th century? Why did these institutions evolve where they did? Parliament, the idea of elections, the idea of freedom, but where did they come from? Where did any of this come from? Where did these institutions come from? There's no question property rights plays a crucial role, and capital plays a crucial role in the development of the great enrichment, in the development of all the wealth we've created. You know, the left would argue that what caused the great enrichment was slavery. The West got very good at enslaving people and then having them produce for you, and that production is what is the basis of the great enrichment. Now, that's just so ridiculous. It's hard to take it seriously. Both because slavery has always existed in human societies. Why weren't the Romans this rich? Why weren't the Jews? After all, Jews had slaves, and Jews were slaves. What about the Egyptians? Ancient Egyptians had lots of slaves, built the pyramids, but did they create wealth? And then, of course, any understanding of economics, you understand that slavery is not wealth creating, not optimal, not economically optimal. And is outcompeted indeed. The North outcompeted the South during this era dramatically. Because it didn't have slaves. Because it had a free market. So, why did institutions develop when they did where they did? Why was capital started to be accumulated and deployed so effectively? Even if you say it's freedom, why was freedom a thing in the early 19th century, late 18th century? Why in the West? Why not in China? Why in the West? Why not in the Middle East? These were societies that through many, many periods were far more advanced than the West. And you have to say with regard to slavery, that at the end of the day, it is capitalism that eradicated slavery, both ideologically and economically. So none of these answers are satisfying. And of course, Ayn Rand had the answer. And I have to give credit here to Judith McCluskey, although her answer is different. She at least recognizes that none of these explanations are true. That the fundamental explanation for why it happened when it happened are the ideas embraced by Western intellectuals during the 18th century. And this is exactly Ayn Rand's identification. It is philosophy. It is intellectual ideas, fundamental ideas, all the way back to metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and ultimately politics, that shape human history. And that is no different in the period of the Great Enrichment. It was the right ideas that made the Great Enrichment possible. Ideas that have been slowly developing off of the foundational ideas of the Greeks, primarily Aristotle, for hundreds of years in Europe, slowly integrating into the culture through the philosophers, through the intellectuals, through the art, and came to flourish during the Enlightenment. What are these ideas? Well, in a sense, they're ideas that come from Greece. The ideas that come from Aristotle. And I think the defining ideas that shaped and have shaped Western civilization, and certainly that caused and shaped the Great Enrichment, are fundamentally two ideas. Two ideas that then are developed into a multitude of implications and implementations. What are these two ideas? Well, one is the efficacy of reason, the importance of reason. That reason as what differentiates man from other beings, but what makes it possible for man to survive and to thrive in this world. Now, of course, that is an identification that is made by the Greeks, and certainly by Aristotle 2,500 years ago. But unfortunately, it is an identification that gets muddled and gets confused in people's minds by the Neoplatonists, by mysticism, by religion, to the point where Aristotle is lost to us, or to many in the West, for 1,000 years. And where the idea of reason as guiding man's actions, logic, the idea of logic, the system of logic, those ideas almost disappear from the West for 1,000 years. Now, it's important to note that reason is an attribute of an individual. You reason. I reason. There's no collective consciousness. There's no collective thinking. There's no collective reasoning. Individuals must reason, and individuals have the capacity to reason. We'll get back to that in a minute. And for Aristotle, indeed, the whole purpose of morality is to teach individuals how to attain happiness, flourishing, success at living. That too disappears. Western civilization is dominated, or the West, I shouldn't say Western civilization because much of it wasn't civilized. The West is dominated by the idea that the purpose of life is not your individual happiness. That the purpose of life is indeed suffering, sacrifice for some higher being or higher purpose or higher good. A belief that this world was insignificant, unimportant. The world of forms, the world of God, the world of perfection is somewhere else. Something to be attained by sacrificing in this world and attaining in the afterworld. Christianity is very Neoplatonist, very influenced by Plato. So the idea of individual happiness, the idea of individual happiness, the idea of individual success, the idea of an individual living a thriving life, a flourishing life, that idea of Aristotle disappears and is replaced with a Christian view of sacrifice and suffering and afterlife and heaven and hell, and life is not great here and now. But these ideas are rediscovered. They're rediscovered by a variety of different thinkers through the ages, but the most important of those is Thomas Aquinas, who brings them in to the Catholic Church and brings reason, gives it credibility again, and logic, and the idea of human happiness starts getting some credence. And the fact that this is in the Catholic Church now becomes somewhat of a cultural phenomenon, and so the culture starts absorbing these ideas. And what you get is a slow filtration of these ideas into the culture, and a slow discovery of Greek culture and Greek ideas and Greek success and Greek beauty, which leads us to a Renaissance. A Renaissance of Greek civilization. A rediscovery of the greatness of Greece. A rediscovery of much of its philosophy, but a rediscovery of its art, a rediscovery of its sense of life, a rediscovery of its attitude towards man. You see that in art. You see that in Michelangelo's David. You see that in the individuality of Leonardo da Vinci's portraits. You see that in Raphael's paintings. We are now not just a mass of humanity. We are not here just to suffer and die. We're not here just to pine for an afterlife. We have personalities. We have lives. We have ambitions. We are, as human beings, able to achieve and succeed and do something with our lives. At least that is reflected, I think, in some of the art. Certainly in the more heroic art of the period. And with this rediscovery, people's minds open up. They challenge the religion of the day. I mean, rumor has it, it's hard to tell, of course, that Leonardo da Vinci is probably an atheist. He didn't care much for religious authority. It's no accident that you get a Reformation kind of at the tail end of the Renaissance. You get a challenge to the authority of the church, not a rejection of religion, but a challenge to authority of the church, which now allows people to have a personal relationship with God, which now allows them to think for themselves a little bit and challenge authority in significant ways. And this, of course, involves wars and bloodshed. And, you know, I've read in some places that the 30-Year War starts in 1618 between Catholics and Protestants and between a variety of different kingdoms, and is maybe the bloodiest war in human history, or one of the bloodiest wars in human history. Bloodier, I think, than World War II or World War I in terms of casualties per capita. And this bloodbath, just at a point in time where people are starting to open up, they're starting to think for themselves, they're starting to be exposed to beauty and to art and to some extent what is possible and the potential of human life, is shocking. The bloodshed is shocking. And the intellectuals of the time are drawn to build on all these past thinking, to build on Aristotle and the thinkers of the Renaissance, and to build something new, because the bloodshed is unthinkable. The conflict's unthinkable. And coming out of this period, you get one of the great intellectual periods in all of human history, maybe the greatest, second only to the Greeks, and that is the Enlightenment. Sir Isaac Newton is born in 1642. The father, or not really the father of scientific revolution, but the man who gives it a huge momentum. We already had Galileo and Copernicus and Kepler. And Leonardo da Vinci was quite a scientist, although many of his scientific discoveries remained unknown for 100 years, because he only wrote them in his diaries and never shared them with anybody. But suddenly you had an explosion of science. The British Academy was established, a place where scientists would get together and talk about their discoveries and do experiments together and discover things about the world together. An era in which scientists were revered. An era that saw the flourishing of human reason. And then philosophers who started to appreciate the role of reason, the importance of the role of reason, started to understand that reason intellectually, to some extent we'd be living it, but now intellectually a foundation started to be built, a weak foundation, not a great foundation, but something. And it started filtering into the culture, this idea that reason is efficacious, that all individuals have reason, that all of us have, through the works of the scientists, like Newton, where suddenly people started to understand how physical objects move, how things in the world, they could understand the world around them. They could use their own mind to figure out what was going on in the world. And they started to think, well, if I can understand these physical things, if I can understand physical reality, if I can be taught by Newton, if I can understand Newton's ideas, if I can understand how the world works, wow, then why can't I make my own choices? Why do I need to bow down before kings? Why do I need to succumb to traditions? Why do I need to do things just because somebody says so? Because an authority dictates it. Whether that authority is God, or whether that authority is a king, or whether that authority is my neighbor, why do I have to do it? If I can understand the laws of physics, surely I can choose my own profession. Remember, people didn't. You did what your father did. You were part of a guild. You didn't have choices. You know why Leonardo, I think I've told this story, but you know why Leonardo da Vinci could be an artist, an inventor, multiple professions all at once and do pretty much what he wanted to do? It was because he was a bastard and therefore didn't qualify to any of the guilds, wasn't assigned a profession. His great luck was that he was a bastard and therefore could do what he wanted, could be productive in ways that he saw fit, had real choices. If he'd been born, quote, legitimately, then he would have been a, what do you call it? Anyway, the profession evades me, but nothing significant, put it that way. That's Leonardo da Vinci. People started to question that. If I have the capacity to figure out or to understand how the world works, I should be able to choose my own profession. I should be able to choose who to marry, who to love, who to live with. I should be able to choose where to live. I should be able to choose how to use my money. I should be able to apply my ideas free without asking for permission. Why do I need permission to start a business? Why do I need permission from a king or from a council or from anybody to invent something? Remember, before the late 18th century, you needed permission to do almost anything. Individuals were not free. Individuals couldn't innovate. They needed permission. Somebody had to approve. So it's this idea of the efficacy of the human mind, the idea that individuals are capable of taking care of themselves, the idea that people can make choices for themselves. That idea is crucial to the development of a great enrichment.
And to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize. I know this is difficult. Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right, all right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I?
All right, before we go on, reminder, please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now, 30 likes. That should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it, but at least the people who are liking it, you know, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start liking it. I want to see that go to 100. All it takes is a click of a thing. Whether you're looking at this, and you know, the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So, you know, and if you don't like the show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share, and you can support the show at JohnBrookShow.com/support, or on Patreon or Subscribestar or Locals. And show your support for the work, for the value hopefully you're receiving from this. And of course, don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, even if you just come here to troll, or even if you're here like Matthew to defend Marx, then you should subscribe, because that way you'll know when to show up. You'll know what shows are on, when they're on. You'll get notified, right? So, yes, like, share, subscribe, support. Like, share, subscribe, support. There you go. Easy. Do one or all of those, please.